Thanksgiving dinner at my childhood home turned into a nightmare when my sister Sarah stood up, wine glass raised, announcing that Mom and Dad were signing the family house over to her while I got nothing. The entire table erupted in cheers, and my aunts, uncles, cousins all congratulating her. I watched Sarah's triumphant smile as she basked in their approval. Then I calmly set down my napkin and asked, "Dad, should I tell them about the mortgage payments, or will you?" Dad's fork clattered to his plate. Sarah's face went white. "Tell us what?" The dining room at 17 Oak Street looked exactly like it had for the past 30 years. Mom's antique china gleamed under the crystal chandelier Dad had installed when Sarah and I were little girls. The mahogany table stretched nearly the length of the room, accommodating our extended family of 14 people who gathered every Thanksgiving without fail. Aunt Margaret sat at Mom's right side, her silver hair perfectly styled as always. Uncle David, retired from the police force, carved the turkey with practiced precision. Cousins Jessica and Tommy argued over cranberry sauce while their spouses tried to maintain peace. I had arrived early that morning to help Mom prepare the feast. Linda Thompson, my mother, moved around her kitchen with the grace of someone who had hosted countless family gatherings. At 62, she still insisted on making everything from scratch. Her famous stuffing recipe remained a closely guarded secret, and her pumpkin pie could make grown men weep with joy. Dad, Robert Thompson, had spent the morning watching football and occasionally offering unhelpful commentary about cooking techniques he'd never mastered. Sarah swept into the house just as we were setting the table, her designer coat draping elegantly over her shoulders. At 32, my older sister possessed the kind of effortless beauty that turned heads wherever she went. Her auburn hair cascaded in perfect waves, and her makeup looked professionally applied. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place as the family favorite. "Sorry I'm late," she announced, kissing Mom and Dad on their cheeks. Traffic was absolutely horrible coming from the city. Sarah worked in marketing for what she claimed was a prestigious firm in Manhattan. She lived in a sleek apartment, drove a luxury sedan, and always seemed to have money for expensive clothes and exotic vacations. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet in my cramped studio apartment across town. As we gathered around the table, I found myself studying the familiar faces of my family. These people had watched me grow up, celebrated my achievements, and supported me through difficult times. Yet somehow, I had always felt like an outsider looking in. Sarah commanded attention effortlessly, while I remained in the shadows. The conversation flowed easily as plates were filled and stories were shared. Uncle David regaled us with tales from his police days. Aunt Margaret discussed her volunteer work at the local animal shelter. Cousin Jessica announced her promotion at the bank, while Tommy shared news about his upcoming wedding. Then Sarah stood up, her wine glass catching the light. The room gradually fell silent as all eyes turned toward her. She wore a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and her smile radiated pure confidence. "I have some wonderful news to share with everyone," she began, her voice carrying the practiced smoothness of someone accustomed to making presentations. "Mom and Dad have decided to sign the house over to me. They want to ensure their legacy stays in capable hands." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Applause erupted around the table. Aunt Margaret clasped her hands together in delight. Uncle David raised his beer bottle in a toast. Cousins Jessica and Tommy exchanged impressed glances while their spouses nodded approvingly. "That's fantastic news, honey," Aunt Margaret gushed. "This house has been in the family for so long. It's perfect that it's staying with you." "Sarah will take such good care of it," added Uncle David. "She's always been so responsible and successful." "What about Wilma?" asked Cousin Jessica, glancing in my direction. Sarah's smile never wavered. "Well, Wilma has her own life to figure out. Mom and Dad thought it would be best for the house to go to someone who can properly maintain it and preserve the family traditions." More cheers and congratulations followed. I watched the scene unfold with growing amazement. 3 years of sacrifice, 3 years of working 70-hour weeks, 3 years of hiding my struggles to protect this very house, and my family was celebrating my exclusion from any inheritance. I reached for my napkin, folding it carefully and placing it beside my plate. The motion felt deliberate and final, like closing a chapter in a book. When I looked up, every face around the table was beaming with joy for Sarah's good fortune. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the celebratory chatter. The room gradually quieted as attention shifted toward me. "Should I tell them about the mortgage payments? Or will you?" The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Dad's fork, loaded with mashed potatoes, tumbled from his hand and clattered against his china plate. The sound seemed amplified in the sudden silence. His face drained of color as he stared at me with wide, startled eyes. Sarah's confident smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered her composure. But I caught the flash of panic that crossed her features, the slight tremor in her hand as she set down her wine glass. "Tell us what?" she demanded, her voice sharp with sudden anxiety. The silence that followed my question felt suffocating. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking away the seconds as every pair of eyes at the table shifted between Dad and me. His face had gone ashen, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. "Wilma, honey, what are you talking about?" Mom asked, her voice uncertain. She looked genuinely confused, which told me everything I needed to know about how much my parents had shared with each other about our family's financial situation. I opened my purse and withdrew a manila folder I had prepared that morning. Inside were 3 years' worth of bank statements, canceled checks, and mortgage payment receipts. I spread them across the table in front of me, the papers creating a barrier between my family and the truth they were about to learn. 3 years ago, on a Tuesday evening in October, Dad lost his job, I began, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. The manufacturing plant where he had worked for 28 years closed down without warning. 2 weeks later, Mom was diagnosed with diabetes, and her medical bills started mounting. I pulled out a foreclosure notice dated 3 years and 2 months ago. The official letterhead of Northeastern Bank stood out starkly against the cream-colored paper. By December of that year, you had missed 4 mortgage payments. The bank sent this foreclosure notice. You had 60 days to bring the account current or lose the house. Dad's hands covered his face, and I could see his shoulders shaking slightly. Mom reached for his arm, her own face reflecting growing understanding and horror. "Dad couldn't bring himself to tell anyone," I continued. "He was too ashamed, too proud. He thought he could find another job quickly and catch up on the payments before anyone noticed." Aunt Margaret leaned forward in her chair. "Robert, is this true? Why didn't you come to us for help?" Before Dad could answer, I continued my explanation, because that's not who he is. Dad spent his entire life providing for his family, being the rock everyone could depend on. Admitting he couldn't handle this crisis would have broken something inside him. I pulled out my own bank statements, highlighting the monthly mortgage payments that had been automatically deducted from my account for the past 36 months. So, I took over the payments. $1,523 every month for 3 years. I picked up a second job working nights at a diner downtown. I canceled my vacation plans, postponed my wedding to Kevin, and moved into a studio apartment the size of Mom's walk-in closet. The numbers were stark and undeniable. Sarah's face had gone pale as she studied the documents spread before me. Uncle David, with his law enforcement background, was examining the papers with professional scrutiny. "My God, Wilma," whispered Cousin Jessica, "you've been paying their mortgage this whole time?" "Not just the mortgage," I said, pulling out additional receipts. When Dad's unemployment ran out and Mom's medical bills kept climbing, I started covering the utilities too. Electric, gas, water, garbage collection. I even paid for Mom's prescription medications when their insurance wouldn't cover the full cost. I could see the mental calculations happening around the table. 3 years of mortgage payments, utilities, medical expenses. The total was staggering for someone working at a nonprofit organization and pulling shifts at a diner. I worked 16-hour days for months at a time, I continued. Weekends, holidays, whenever the diner needed extra help. I lived on ramen noodles and generic cereal because every extra dollar went toward keeping this house in the family. Sarah finally found her voice. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Why keep it a secret?" I looked directly at her. seeing my sister clearly for perhaps the first time in years, because Dad asked me not to. He was humiliated that his youngest daughter had to bail him out. He promised he would pay me back as soon as he got back on his feet. But I did get back on my feet, Dad said quietly, finally speaking. I found work at the hardware store 18 months ago. It doesn't pay nearly what the plant did, but it's steady income. Then why didn't you resume the mortgage payments? Asked Uncle David. Dad looked at me with tears in his eyes, because by then, Wilma was so far behind on her own bills that she couldn't afford to give up her second job. She was trapped in this cycle of working herself to death to support us. The weight of this revelation settled over the table like a heavy blanket. I could see the shame and guilt in my parents' faces, the shock and disbelief in my extended family's expressions, and something else in Sarah's demeanor that I couldn't quite identify. So when Sarah says Mom and Dad are signing the house over to her, I said, gathering the documents back into their folder, that's legally impossible. You can't transfer property that's still under mortgage to someone other than the person making the payments. I've been the de facto owner of this house for 3 years. I pulled out one final document, a legal opinion I had obtained from a real estate attorney the previous week. According to state law, my mortgage payments and maintenance of the property give me a legal claim that supersedes any attempted transfer. The Thanksgiving feast sat cooling on the table as my family absorbed this information. The turkey that Uncle David had carved with such ceremony looked abandoned and forgotten. Mom's famous stuffing remained untouched on most plates. Sarah's confident smile had completely disappeared. She sat rigid in her chair, her hands clenched in her lap, staring at the documents as if they might spontaneously combust. Sarah, I said gently, did you know about any of this when you stood up to make your announcement? Her hesitation told me everything I needed to know, but her response surprised even me. I knew Dad was having financial trouble a few years ago, she admitted slowly, but I thought it had all been resolved. I assumed his new job had taken care of everything. You never asked, I pointed out. You never called to check on them, never offered to help, never wondered how they managed to keep the house during Dad's unemployment. The accusation hung in the air between us. Sarah had always been good at avoiding unpleasant realities, at maintaining her perfect life, while others handled the messy details. I was building my career, she said defensively. I was establishing myself in the city. I figured if they needed help, they would ask. Like Dad asked for help when he lost his job, I challenged. Like Mom asked for help with her medical bills. Our parents would rather lose everything than burden their children with their problems. Aunt Margaret reached across the table and grasped my hand. Wilma, dear, we had no idea. If we had known what you were going through, what you were sacrificing, that's exactly why I didn't tell anyone, I interrupted. This wasn't about getting credit or recognition. It was about family. It was about making sure Mom and Dad could stay in the home they've lived in for 3 decades. Uncle David was studying the legal documents with professional interest. These mortgage payments. Wilma, do you realize what you've done financially? You've essentially been buying this house for the past 3 years. I nodded. The attorney explained it to me. Between my down payment equivalent through the back payments I covered and the equity I've built through consistent payments, I own approximately 67% of the house's current value. The number seemed to echo around the dining room. 67%. More than 2/3 of the family home that Sarah had just announced would be hers. Sarah's face had gone from pale to flushed, and I could see anger building behind her eyes. So what are you saying, Wilma? That you planned this whole thing? That you deliberately let me humiliate myself so you could play the hero? Her accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. I had known this conversation was coming. I had prepared for it. But her characterization of my motives was completely wrong. I hoped it wouldn't come to this, I said honestly. I hoped that when Mom and Dad were ready to discuss inheritance and wills, they would remember who actually saved their house. I hoped they would consider what I had sacrificed for this family. I looked around the table at my relatives, seeing a mixture of shame, admiration, and confusion in their faces. But when you stood up tonight and announced that I would get nothing, when you smiled while telling our family that I wasn't worthy of inheriting anything from the house I've been paying for, I realized that hoping wasn't enough. The dining room fell silent again, except for the continued ticking of the grandfather clock. Sarah's announcement, which had been greeted with such enthusiasm just minutes earlier, now seemed cruel and misguided. But I wasn't finished. Sarah's reaction to my revelations had confirmed suspicions I had been harboring for months. Her defensive anger, her immediate focus on protecting her own interests rather than acknowledging my sacrifices, told me there was more to this story, and I was prepared to tell them everything. Sarah's defensive anger was escalating, and I could see the calculating look in her eyes that I remembered from our childhood. It was the same expression she wore when she got caught breaking something and was trying to figure out how to blame someone else. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, standing up from her chair. "You can't just ambush us with paperwork and act like you're some kind of saint. If you were really helping out of love, you wouldn't be throwing it in our faces now." Her words might have stung if I hadn't spent the last 6 months preparing for this exact moment. I reached into my purse again and withdrew a second folder, this one considerably thicker than the first. "You're absolutely right, Sarah. If this was really just about helping family, I wouldn't need to defend myself. But since you've brought up the subject of financial responsibility and family loyalty, I think everyone should know about your contributions to our parents' well-being." I opened the folder and spread out a series of bank statements, but these weren't mine. They were photocopies of Mom and Dad's checking account records that I had obtained legally through a power of attorney Dad had given me when he was hospitalized for chest pains 8 months earlier. "Sarah, can you tell everyone when you last visited Mom and Dad?" I asked, my voice remaining calm despite the storm I was about to unleash. "I don't see how that's relevant," she replied, but her voice had lost its confident edge. "Humor me. When was your last visit here?" She shifted uncomfortably. "I was here for Easter, and I called for their birthdays." "Easter was 8 months ago," I pointed out. "But according to these bank records, you've been here much more recently than that." I pulled out a series of canceled checks, each one written from Dad's account to cash, each one bearing Sarah's distinctive signature on the back endorsement. June 14th, a check for $400. June 28th, $350. July 12th, $600. I continued reading dates and amounts while the family watched in growing horror. August 3rd, $500. August 21st, $725. Uncle David leaned forward to examine the checks. As a retired police officer, he knew what he was looking at. "These are all endorsed by Sarah, but they're written from your parents' account. That's because Sarah has been making regular visits to withdraw money from Mom and Dad's checking account," I explained. "Not to visit or spend time with family, just to take cash." Mom's face had gone white. "Sarah, honey, what is Wilma talking about?" Before Sarah could respond, I continued with my presentation. "But the checks are just part of it. Sarah, would you like to tell everyone about your trips to Atlantic City? Or should I?" The reaction around the table was immediate. Aunt Margaret gasped audibly. Uncle David's expression hardened into the look I remembered from childhood when he was angry. Cousin Jessica's mouth fell open in shock. I pulled out printed email confirmations and hotel receipts. Borgata Hotel and Casino, reservation confirmations for 12 visits in the past 18 months. Caesars Atlantic City, 8 visits. Ocean Casino Resort, 6 visits. Always checking in on Friday afternoon and checking out Sunday evening. Sarah's face had gone from flushed to ashen. "Those trips are none of your business, Wilma. What I do with my free time is my choice." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "Your gambling is your choice. But funding your gambling addiction with money stolen from our elderly parents isn't your choice to make." The word stolen hit the table like a physical blow. Dad's head snapped up, his eyes focusing on Sarah with an expression I had never seen before. Mom's hand flew to her throat in shock. "I didn't steal anything," Sarah protested, but her voice was shaking now. "Mom and Dad gave me that money. They wanted to help me out when I was having financial difficulties." I pulled out another set of documents, these ones more damaging than anything I had shown so far. "Is that what you told them when you forged Dad's signature on these checks?" I asked, spreading out 6 checks that bore Dad's name but clearly showed signs of forgery. Or when you used Mom's debit card to withdraw $800 from her savings account while she was sedated after her colonoscopy. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. I had spent months gathering documentation, working with the bank's fraud department to identify suspicious transactions, and consulting with experts about signature analysis. The bank flagged these transactions as potentially fraudulent, I continued. They called Dad to verify the withdrawals, but Sarah had coached him to confirm them. She told him he had signed the checks but forgotten due to his stress. Dad's voice was barely a whisper. I remember those phone calls. You said I was having memory problems from worry. You said I had agreed to help you with temporary financial difficulties. Sarah's composure was completely crumbling now. Dad, you did agree to help me. You said family comes first. You said you wanted to support me through a difficult time. What difficult time? Mom asked, her voice sharp with growing anger. You told us you got a promotion. You said your marketing firm was expanding, and you were being given more responsibility. I pulled out one more document, and this one made Sarah visibly flinch when she saw it. Sarah's employment was terminated 4 months ago for discrepancies in her expense account, I read from an official letter. The company declined to pursue criminal charges in exchange for her resignation and repayment of misappropriated funds. The dining room erupted in shocked exclamations from the extended family. Sarah had been fired for theft, something she had hidden from everyone while continuing to withdraw money from our parents. She hasn't had a steady income for 4 months, I continued. But she's been maintaining her expensive lifestyle by systematically draining Mom and Dad's savings. Money they need for medical expenses, home repairs, and basic living costs. I pulled out a spreadsheet I had prepared showing the total amounts withdrawn over the past year and a half. $8,467 in direct withdrawals, $12,300 in forged checks, another $6,800 in unauthorized debit card transactions. Sarah has stolen over $27,000 from our parents in less than 2 years. The number hung in the air like a toxic cloud, $27,000. Money that could have helped with Dad's unemployment. Money that could have covered Mom's medical bills. Money that would have made my 3 years of financial sacrifice unnecessary. Uncle David was already reaching for his phone. Sarah, this is elder abuse. This is felony theft. Do you understand the legal implications of what you've done? But Sarah wasn't listening to Uncle David. She was staring at me with pure hatred in her eyes. You planned this, she hissed. You've been investigating me, stalking me, building some kind of case against me. What kind of sister does that? Her attempt to turn the situation around and make herself the victim was breathtaking in its audacity. The kind of sister who works 2 jobs to save her parents' house while her older sister gambles away their retirement savings, I replied. The kind of sister who notices when her parents' medication money goes missing and their grocery budget keeps shrinking. I pulled out photographs that I had taken discreetly over the past few months, showing Sarah's car in the casino parking garages, Sarah at gambling tables, Sarah celebrating wins with champagne she couldn't afford. The kind of sister who follows her sibling to Atlantic City to document a gambling addiction that's destroying our family's financial security. The photographs were damning. They showed Sarah in her element, surrounded by the glitz and excitement of the casino environment, clearly comfortable and familiar with the surroundings. You stalked me, Sarah accused, but her voice was weak now. I investigated suspicious activity that was draining our parents' bank accounts, I corrected. I did what any responsible family member would do when they noticed signs of financial elder abuse. Aunt Margaret was studying the photographs with horror. Sarah, honey, how could you do this to your parents? How could you take advantage of them when they were already struggling? Sarah's last defense was to attack my motives. She's jealous, Sarah said desperately. She's always been jealous that Mom and Dad love me more. This is all about revenge because I got the house. But her words rang hollow now. The evidence spread across the dining room table told a story that no amount of deflection could change. Sarah, Dad said quietly, his voice heavy with disappointment and heartbreak. The house was never yours to get. And with those words, I knew we were approaching the most shocking revelation of all. Because while my family was reeling from the scope of Sarah's betrayal, they had no idea that the story was far from over. Dad's statement about the house never being Sarah's hung in the air, but I could see confusion in my family's faces. They didn't understand the full scope of what had been happening behind the scenes. Sarah's face showed a flicker of panic that told me she knew exactly what Dad meant. "There's something else everyone needs to know," I said, reaching for a third folder that I had kept separate from the others. Sarah's announcement tonight wasn't a surprise to me because I knew it was coming. I pulled out a series of documents that made Uncle David's police training immediately kick in. His expression shifted from shock to professional alertness as he recognized legal paperwork. 2 weeks ago, our family attorney, William Morrison, called me with some concerns about documents that had been submitted to his office for processing, I began. Documents that supposedly showed Mom and Dad's intention to transfer the house to Sarah. I spread out copies of a house deed transfer, complete with signatures and notarization. At first glance, it looked completely legitimate and official. Sarah had submitted these papers, claiming that Mom and Dad had decided to gift her the house as an early inheritance. She said they wanted to avoid probate complications and ensure a smooth transition. Mom leaned forward to look at the documents. But Robert and I never signed anything like this. We never even discussed transferring the house. "I know," I said gently. "That's why Mr. Morrison called me. He's been the family attorney for 15 years. He knows Dad's signature, and he knows proper legal procedures." I pointed to the signatures on the transfer documents. "These signatures are forged." Sarah practiced Dad's handwriting and Mom's cursive until she could replicate them well enough to fool a casual observer. Uncle David was examining the papers with his trained eye. "The ink consistency is wrong," he observed. "These signatures were written with a different pen than the rest of the document. And the pressure patterns don't match natural signing motions." Mr. Morrison noticed the same things, I confirmed. But more importantly, he noticed something else. Sarah had befriended his new legal assistant, a young woman named Jennifer who had just started working at the firm. I pulled out printed emails that the attorney had forwarded to me after Jennifer confessed her involvement. Sarah told Jennifer that she was planning a surprise for our parents. She said she wanted to have all the legal paperwork prepared in advance, so that when Mom and Dad decided to transfer the house, everything would be ready for immediate processing. The emails showed a pattern of manipulation that was sophisticated and calculated. Sarah had convinced Jennifer to explain the legal requirements for property transfers, the proper forms to use, and even the specific language that needed to be included in the documents. Jennifer thought she was helping with a loving family surprise, I continued. She gave Sarah blank deed transfer forms, explained the notarization requirements, and even provided examples of properly executed transfers. Cousin Jessica was reading the emails with growing amazement. She manipulated that poor girl into giving her everything she needed to forge legal documents. But Sarah's plan was even more elaborate than simple forgery, I said, pulling out more evidence. She spent weeks researching property law, inheritance regulations, and legal precedents. She wanted to make sure her forged documents would hold up under scrutiny. I showed them printed web searches from Sarah's computer, which I had gained access to when she asked me to house-sit her apartment the previous month. The search history revealed months of planning and preparation. Property transfer without probate, how to execute deed transfers, legal requirements for inherited property, statute of limitations on property disputes. She researched every angle to make sure her scheme would work, but the most damning evidence was yet to come. I pulled out a folder that contained Sarah's own handwritten notes, documents I had photographed when I discovered them in her apartment. She practiced Mom and Dad's signatures for weeks, I said, showing pages covered with attempts to replicate their handwriting. She studied examples of their signatures from old documents, analyzing the pen strokes and letter formations. The practice pages were disturbing to look at. Sarah had approached forgery with the dedication of a master counterfeiter, filling page after page with signature attempts until she achieved convincing replicas. But the most revealing part is this, I said, pulling out Sarah's written timeline for her scheme. She had planned tonight's announcement for months. She knew exactly when she would reveal the house transfer to the family. The timeline showed Sarah's methodical approach to fraud. She had planned to submit the forged documents immediately after Thanksgiving, claiming that our parents had made the decision over the holiday weekend. By the time anyone questioned the paperwork, the transfer would have already been processed and recorded. She was going to use tonight's announcement as evidence that Mom and Dad had publicly declared their intention, I explained. 15 witnesses who heard her say that our parents were giving her the house. Uncle David's expression had shifted into full investigation mode. Sarah, this is premeditated fraud. This isn't just theft anymore. This is conspiracy to commit forgery, elder abuse, and property fraud. Sarah's face was no longer pale. It was gray, the color of someone whose world was collapsing around them, but she still tried to maintain her innocence. I never submitted those documents, she protested weakly. I was just exploring options. I was trying to understand the legal process. I pulled out the final piece of evidence that destroyed her last defense. You're right. You never submitted them. Because Mr. Morrison called me before you had the chance. I showed them email correspondence between the attorney and myself. But you had scheduled an appointment for this Monday morning to file the paperwork. Jennifer confirmed that you had specifically requested the earliest available appointment after the Thanksgiving holiday. The appointment confirmation was in writing, scheduled under Sarah's name with a note that she would be submitting urgent family documents that needed immediate processing. Your plan was perfect, I continued. Announce the transfer to the family on Thursday, file the forged paperwork on Monday, and by the time anyone questioned anything, you would be the legal owner of a house worth $375,000. The value of the house seemed to echo around the dining room. $375,000. A life-changing amount of money that Sarah had attempted to steal through sophisticated fraud. Mom was staring at the forged documents with tears in her eyes. Sarah, how could you plan something so elaborate? How could you forge our signatures and lie to everyone we trust? Sarah's response revealed the depth of her desperation and the twisted logic that had driven her criminal behavior. Because you were going to give it to her anyway, she said, pointing at me with shaking hands. Everyone always loves Wilma more. Everyone always thinks she's so perfect and responsible. I knew that when you made your will, she would get everything, and I would get nothing. Her confession was breathtaking in its self-centered reasoning. She had committed multiple felonies because she assumed she wouldn't inherit as much as she wanted. So you decided to steal it first, Uncle David stated flatly. You decided to defraud your parents and forge legal documents rather than wait to see what they actually decided. I earned it, Sarah insisted, her voice rising with hysteria. I'm the older daughter. I'm supposed to inherit the family home. It's tradition. Her sense of entitlement was staggering, especially considering the evidence of her gambling addiction and theft that was spread across the table. Sarah, I said quietly, you've stolen over $27,000 from our parents, lost your job for theft, forged legal documents, and planned to defraud them out of their house. What exactly did you think you earned? But even as I asked the question, I knew Sarah's problems went deeper than anyone at the table realized. Her gambling addiction, her theft, her elaborate fraud scheme, they were all symptoms of a larger problem that was about to explode into view. And I had evidence of that too. The devastation on my parents' faces was heartbreaking to witness. Dad sat slumped in his chair, looking older than his 62 years, while Mom dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. The Thanksgiving feast had grown cold and forgotten as my family processed the scope of Sarah's betrayal. But I could see that my parents weren't just shocked by what I had revealed. There was something in their expressions that suggested they weren't entirely surprised. Dad kept glancing at Mom with a look I couldn't quite decipher, and Mom's reaction seemed almost rehearsed. Mom, Dad, I said gently, you don't look as surprised by this as everyone else. Did you already know about some of this? The silence that followed my question was different from the shocked silence that had accompanied my earlier revelations. This was the silence of people who had been caught keeping their own secrets. Dad cleared his throat and looked around the table at our extended family. Linda and I have known about Sarah's gambling problem for 3 months, he said quietly. The admission hit the table like a thunderbolt. Aunt Margaret's mouth fell open. Uncle David leaned back in his chair, clearly processing this new information. You knew? Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. The bank called us about suspicious activity on our account, Mom explained, her voice heavy with sadness. They flagged the unusual withdrawal pattern and asked us to verify several large transactions. Dad nodded, picking up the explanation. When we looked at the bank statements carefully, we could see what was happening. The forged signatures were obvious to us because we knew we hadn't written those checks. But we also knew Sarah was in trouble, Mom continued. We could see the pattern, the increasing amounts, the frequency. We recognized the signs of gambling addiction. I felt my understanding of the situation shifting dramatically. If you knew about the theft and the gambling, why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you report it to the police? Because we hoped she would come to us, Dad said, his voice breaking slightly. We thought if we gave her time and opportunity, she would confess and ask for help. Mom reached across the table and grasped my hand. And because we knew about your mortgage payments, sweetheart, we've known for 8 months. This revelation stunned me completely. You knew I was paying the mortgage? Your bank accidentally sent a payment confirmation to our old mailing address, Dad explained. The postal service forwarded it to us, and we realized what you had been doing. I felt tears beginning to form in my eyes as the full implications of their knowledge sank in. We were devastated, Mom said softly. Devastated that our daughter had been sacrificing so much to save our house. Devastated that we had been too proud to ask for help. And devastated that we had let it go on for so long. But we were also proud, Dad added quickly. Proud that we had raised a daughter with such integrity and selflessness. Proud that you would work yourself to exhaustion to protect your family. Uncle David was studying my parents with his investigative instincts fully engaged. So when Sarah announced the house transfer tonight, you already knew it was impossible? We knew there were no legal documents, Mom confirmed. We knew Sarah couldn't transfer property she didn't own and couldn't inherit. Then why did you let her make the announcement? Cousin Jessica asked. Why didn't you stop her before she humiliated herself? Dad and Mom exchanged a long look, and I could see they had discussed this scenario extensively. Because we needed everyone to see what Sarah was willing to do, Dad said finally. We needed our family to understand who Sarah had become and who Wilma had always been. Mom nodded, squeezing my hand tighter. We've made terrible mistakes as parents. We favored Sarah for too long. We overlooked her problems and enabled her bad behavior. We let you sacrifice everything while she took advantage of everyone who loved her. We wanted tonight to be the end of our family's dysfunction, Dad added. We wanted truth and consequences, and a fresh start for everyone. The scope of my parents' planning was beginning to dawn on me. This hadn't been an accident or a spontaneous confrontation. They had orchestrated tonight's events as carefully as Sarah had planned her fraud. You set her up, I said, though without judgment. I was beginning to understand their reasoning. We gave her every opportunity to tell the truth, Mom corrected. We asked her directly about her job situation last week. We gave her chances to confess about the missing money. We told her we were reviewing our wills and inheritance plans. She chose to lie every time, Dad said sadly. She chose to elaborate her deception rather than come clean and ask for help. I pulled out my phone and showed them something I hadn't shared with the rest of the family yet. You might not know about this part. Sarah didn't just plan to announce the house transfer tonight. She planned to ask for a family loan to help with the transition costs. I showed them text messages Sarah had sent to various family members over the past week, laying the groundwork for her financial requests. She texted Aunt Margaret about needing help with property taxes. She messaged Uncle David about home inspection costs. She was planning to collect thousands of dollars from our relatives based on her fake inheritance. The text messages revealed yet another layer of Sarah's scheme. She hadn't just planned to steal the house, she had planned to defraud our entire extended family in the process. Aunt Margaret was reading the messages with horrified fascination. She asked me for $2,000 yesterday. She said you needed help with unexpected legal fees for the house transfer. She told me the property needed a new roof before the transfer could be finalized, Uncle David added grimly. She wanted me to co-sign a loan for $15,000. The scope of Sarah's planned fraud was breathtaking. She had intended to collect money from multiple family members while simultaneously stealing a house worth $375,000. But here's what I think you don't know, I said, pulling out a final folder that I had been saving for this moment. Sarah's problems are much bigger than gambling addiction and theft from family. I showed them a report I had received from the private investigator I had hired the previous month. The investigation had uncovered criminal activity that extended far beyond our family. Sarah is involved with organized crime, I said quietly. The gambling ring she's been frequenting is connected to a loan shark operation that's under federal investigation. The words seemed to echo around the dining room like gunshots. Organized crime, federal investigation. My sister wasn't just a troubled family member anymore. She was connected to dangerous criminals. She owes $30,000 to people who collect debts through violence, I continued. The house fraud, the family theft, the planned loan scam. It was all designed to raise enough money to pay off her gambling debts before they decided to collect through other means. Sarah's face had gone completely white. She was staring at me with the expression of someone whose darkest secrets had just been exposed to the world. "How did you find this out?" she whispered. "Because last month, 2 men came to your apartment building looking for you," I replied. "They told your neighbor they were collecting on a debt. They left a message that payment was due within 30 days, or alternative collection methods would be implemented." The threat of violence hung over the dining room like a storm cloud. My sister hadn't just been stealing from family and committing fraud. She had been doing it under the pressure of criminal threats. But even this revelation wasn't the end of the story. Because while I had been gathering evidence of Sarah's crimes, I had also uncovered evidence of something that would change everything for our family. And that evidence was about to turn Thanksgiving dinner into the most shocking family confrontation any of us had ever experienced. The mention of loan sharks and organized crime had transformed the atmosphere in the dining room from family drama to something much more serious and frightening. Uncle David's law enforcement instincts were now fully engaged, and I could see him mentally cataloging the criminal implications of everything he had heard. "Wilma," he said carefully, "if Sarah is involved with dangerous criminals who are threatening violence, we need to contact law enforcement immediately. This isn't just family business anymore." I nodded, knowing that my next revelation would make police involvement not just advisable but absolutely necessary. I hired a private investigator because I suspected Sarah's problems were bigger than what we could see, I began, pulling out the comprehensive report I had received. But what he discovered goes far beyond Sarah's gambling debts. I opened the investigator's file and spread out surveillance photographs, financial records, and criminal background reports that painted a picture of criminal activity stretching back over 2 years. Sarah's boyfriend, Marcus Chen, isn't just someone she met at the casino, I explained, showing photographs of a well-dressed man in his 30s. He's a key figure in an identity theft ring that's been operating throughout the Northeast. The photographs showed Marcus and Sarah together at various locations, but they also showed Marcus meeting with known criminals, exchanging packages, and conducting business that clearly wasn't legitimate. Using information Sarah provided about our family, Marcus has been creating false identities based on our personal data, I continued. Social security numbers, birth dates, financial information, employment history. He's been selling our identities to criminals for 2 years. I pulled out credit reports that showed unauthorized accounts opened in our parents' names, in my name, and in the names of several of our relatives. The scope of the identity theft was staggering. "Aunt Margaret, remember when you had trouble with unauthorized credit card charges last year?" I asked. "Uncle David, the problems you had with someone trying to open a bank account using your information?" That was all Marcus, using data that Sarah provided. The faces around the table showed growing horror as family members realized they had all been victims of Sarah's criminal boyfriend. But identity theft was just the beginning, I continued. The private investigator discovered that Sarah has been providing Marcus with detailed information about elderly people in our community. Their financial situations, their social schedules, their security arrangements. I showed them surveillance photographs of Sarah visiting various elderly neighbors and family friends, always with a notebook, always asking questions about personal information. Mrs. Henderson next door, who was burglarized 3 months ago. The thieves knew exactly when she would be at her weekly bridge game and exactly where she kept her jewelry. Sarah had visited her the week before to check on her health. The implications were becoming clear to everyone at the table. Sarah hadn't just been stealing from our parents. She had been facilitating crimes against vulnerable elderly people throughout our community. Mr. Patterson from church, who lost his life savings to a phone scam. The scammers knew his late wife's name, his children's birth dates, his medical conditions, and his financial institution. Information only someone close to the family would know. I pulled out a list of 17 elderly victims who had been targeted over the past 18 months, all of them connected to our family or community, all of them victimized after Sarah had contact with them. Sarah has been working as a scout for a criminal organization, I said flatly. She identifies vulnerable targets, gathers their personal information, and provides it to criminals who then victimize them through various fraud schemes. The dining room had become completely silent except for the sound of Mom crying softly. The woman she had raised and loved had become something none of us could have imagined. There's more, I said, though I hated having to continue. The FBI has been investigating this criminal network for 8 months. Sarah's name appears in their surveillance files as an active participant in organized criminal activity. I showed them printed excerpts from federal investigation records that the private investigator had obtained through legal channels. Sarah's involvement wasn't peripheral or accidental. She was a key figure in a sophisticated criminal operation. They have recordings of her meetings with Marcus and other criminals. They have evidence of her providing victim information and collecting payment for successful frauds. She's not just a gambling addict who made bad choices. She's a career criminal. Sarah had been sitting in stunned silence throughout my presentation, but now she exploded into desperate denials. "This is all lies," she screamed, jumping to her feet. "You hired someone to spy on me, to make up stories about me, to ruin my life because you're jealous." Her accusation might have carried more weight if I hadn't prepared for this exact response. "The FBI surveillance recordings are public record," I said calmly. "Would you like me to play them for the family?" I pulled out my phone and accessed audio files that the investigator had obtained legally through federal Freedom of Information requests. "This is from 6 weeks ago," I said, pressing play. Sarah's voice came clearly through the phone speaker. "The old man on Maple Street keeps his cash in a shoebox under his bed. He told me his wife used to handle all the finances, so he doesn't understand banking. He'd be perfect for the Social Security scam." The recording continued with Sarah providing detailed information about an elderly man's daily routine, his financial vulnerabilities, and his emotional weaknesses that could be exploited by criminals. Mom's crying intensified as she heard her daughter's voice planning crimes against innocent people. Dad sat with his head in his hands, looking completely broken. "There are 17 hours of similar recordings," I said quietly. Sarah discussing potential victims, collecting payment for successful frauds, and planning increasingly sophisticated crimes against elderly people. I pulled out bank records showing Sarah's payments from the criminal organization. The amounts were substantial, far more than she could have earned from any legitimate employment. Over the past 18 months, Sarah has been paid $43,000 for her work with this criminal network, I revealed. Money she used to fund her gambling addiction, while simultaneously stealing from our parents. The math was brutal and clear. Sarah had been earning more from victimizing elderly people than most people made from honest work, yet she had still felt entitled to steal from her own family. But here's the part that makes this situation extremely dangerous for our entire family, I continued. The FBI investigation is concluding. Federal arrests are scheduled to begin next week. Sarah's name is on the arrest warrant list. The words seemed to hang in the air like a death sentence. Federal arrest warrants. My sister was about to be charged with federal crimes that could result in decades in prison. That's why she accelerated her house fraud scheme, I explained. She knows she's going to be arrested. She was planning to liquidate the house, collect money from family members, and flee before the federal marshals could find her. Sarah's face had gone from white to gray. She looked like someone who was about to collapse from shock and terror. "You don't understand," she said desperately. "I can't go to prison. Marcus said he would protect me. He said as long as I kept providing information and money, I would be safe." Her confession was complete and damning. She had admitted to working with criminals, providing victim information, and planning to flee prosecution. But even as I watched my sister's world collapse around her, I knew that the most shocking revelation was still to come. because Sarah's desperate attempt to save herself was about to expose the darkest secret of all. Sarah's confession had left the dining room in stunned silence, but I could see in her eyes that panic was driving her toward even more desperate measures. Her entire criminal scheme was unraveling. Federal arrest warrants were pending, and she was facing decades in prison. "You have to help me," she pleaded, looking around the table at family members who were still processing the scope of her criminal activity. "I'm your daughter, your sister. You can't just abandon me." Her appeal for family loyalty was breathtaking in its audacity, considering she had just been exposed as someone who had victimized elderly people and stolen from her own parents. "Sarah," Uncle David said firmly, "you need to contact a criminal defense attorney immediately. The charges you're facing are extremely serious." "I can't go to prison," Sarah repeated, her voice rising with hysteria. "You don't understand what happens to people like me in federal prison." But instead of accepting the legal reality of her situation, Sarah did something that shocked even me. She lunged across the table and grabbed the folders containing all the evidence I had presented, clearly intending to destroy the documentation of her crimes. "Sarah, no," I said, reaching to stop her, but she was already tearing at the papers with desperate fury. "If there's no evidence, there's no case," she screamed. "I'll destroy all of it, and then it will be my word against yours." What followed was a brief but intense physical struggle as I tried to protect the evidence while Sarah attempted to destroy it. Uncle David quickly intervened, restraining Sarah while I gathered the scattered papers. But during the struggle, something even more shocking happened. As Sarah fought to destroy the evidence, she began making threats that revealed the true depth of her criminal involvement. "You think you're so smart," she snarled at me, her mask of civility completely gone. "You have no idea what I'm capable of. You have no idea what I've already done." "What are you talking about?" I asked, though something in her tone made my blood run cold. Sarah's response revealed the darkest secret of all. "Do you think Dad's chest pains last spring were natural?" she asked with a vicious smile. "Do you think Mom's increasing confusion and memory problems are just aging?" The implication of her words hit me like a physical blow. "Sarah, what did you do?" "I've been putting things in their food," she confessed with terrifying calm. "Anxiety medication in Mom's coffee to make her confused and compliant. Blood pressure medication in Dad's orange juice to cause cardiac episodes." The room erupted in horrified gasps and exclamations. Mom grabbed Dad's arm in terror while Uncle David immediately reached for his phone to call 911. "You've been poisoning them?" I asked, though the evidence was suddenly obvious in retrospect. "Not poisoning," Sarah corrected with twisted logic. "Medicating. I needed them confused and sick so they would be easier to manipulate. I needed them to seem incompetent so that when I had them declared mentally unfit, I could take control of their finances." Her confession revealed a plan that was even more sinister than fraud or theft. She had been systematically drugging our parents to compromise their mental and physical health as part of her criminal scheme. "The plan was perfect," she continued, her restraint by Uncle David not stopping her from talking. "Make them sick, get them declared incompetent, take power of attorney, and liquidate all their assets before anyone noticed." I pulled out my phone and called 911 myself, knowing that our parents needed immediate medical attention to assess the effects of whatever drugs Sarah had been giving them. "This is a medical emergency," I told the dispatcher. "We have 2 elderly people who have been systematically drugged by a family member over an extended period." But Sarah wasn't finished with her confessions. The stress of her situation had broken her psychologically, and the truth was pouring out of her like water from a burst dam. "I've been doing it for 8 months, she said almost proudly. "Every time I visited, I brought special coffee for Mom and fresh orange juice for Dad. They thought I was being thoughtful and caring." The cruelty of her method was staggering. She had used the pretense of loving care to slowly poison our parents into mental and physical decline. "The anxiety medication made Mom confused and forgetful," she explained. "The blood pressure medication gave Dad chest pains and made him weak. I needed them to appear incompetent so that when I petitioned for guardianship, the court would approve it." Uncle David was recording her confession on his phone while maintaining his physical restraint. "Sarah, you realize you're confessing to attempted murder?" "Not murder," she protested. I calculated the doses carefully. I researched drug interactions and safe levels. I wanted them sick, not dead. Her clinical approach to drugging our parents was perhaps the most chilling aspect of her confession. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. It was a carefully planned and executed assault on two innocent people. EMT sirens could be heard approaching the house as emergency medical personnel responded to my call. Mom and Dad would need immediate blood tests and medical evaluation to determine what drugs were in their systems and what damage might have been done. "There's something else," Sarah said, her confessions continuing as her psychological breakdown accelerated. "I've been recording conversations in this house for months." She pulled a small electronic device from her purse, a sophisticated recording system that had been documenting our family's private conversations. "Marcus wanted evidence that could be used for blackmail," she explained. "Family secrets, financial information, anything that could be used to extort money or silence from people. The violation of our privacy was another layer of betrayal that was almost impossible to process. Our most intimate family conversations had been recorded and potentially shared with criminals. I've been selling information about everyone," she continued. "Bank account numbers, social security information, personal secrets, medical conditions. Anyone who trusted me became a potential victim." The scope of her betrayal extended far beyond our immediate family. Sarah had been weaponizing every relationship she had, turning trust and affection into opportunities for criminal exploitation. As the EMTs entered the house and began assessing our parents' condition, police officers arrived to arrest Sarah on multiple charges, including elder abuse, assault with a deadly weapon through drugging, fraud, and conspiracy. But even as she was being handcuffed and read her rights, Sarah made one final attempt to destroy our family. "You think you've won," she said to me with pure hatred. "But wait until everyone finds out what you've really done. Wait until they learn what you were willing to sacrifice to get this house." Her words were clearly meant to plant doubt about my motives and methods, but they had no power anymore. The truth had been told, the evidence had been preserved, and justice was finally being served. As Sarah was led away in handcuffs, our family began the long process of healing from betrayal that had cut deeper than any of us could have imagined. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of the family home that had nearly been lost to Sarah's elaborate criminal schemes. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows that Mom had cleaned just that morning, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floors that Dad had refinished during his recovery. The legal proceedings had concluded the previous month. Sarah was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for her involvement in the elder abuse and criminal conspiracy charges. The fraud charges, identity theft, and attempted murder through drugging had resulted in additional state sentences that would run consecutively. She would not be eligible for parole for at least 12 years. The trial had been emotionally devastating but ultimately healing for our family. Hearing the full scope of Sarah's crimes presented in court had helped us understand that her actions weren't the result of temporary poor judgment or family dysfunction. She had made deliberate choices to harm innocent people, including her own parents, for personal financial gain. During the 6 months of legal proceedings, our family had undergone profound changes. Mom and Dad had received extensive medical treatment to reverse the effects of the drugs Sarah had been giving them. Dad's cardiac episodes stopped completely once the blood pressure medication was eliminated from his system. Mom's memory and cognitive function returned to normal within 8 weeks of stopping the anxiety medication Sarah had been secretly administering. The psychological healing had taken longer. All of us had required therapy to process the betrayal and trauma of discovering that someone we loved had been systematically victimizing not just our family, but our entire community. 17 elderly victims had been identified, and Sarah's information had contributed to financial losses exceeding $400,000 among vulnerable seniors. The house transfer had been completed legally and properly. Mom and Dad had officially deeded the property to me in recognition of the 3 years of mortgage payments and my role in protecting them from Sarah's criminal schemes. But rather than keeping the house solely for myself, we had restructured it as a family trust that would benefit everyone while ensuring it remained in the family for future generations. Uncle David had used his law enforcement connections to ensure that all of Sarah's victims received restitution through the federal criminal prosecution. The organized crime network she had been working with was completely dismantled, with Marcus and 6 other criminals receiving substantial prison sentences. Most importantly, our extended family had grown closer through the crisis. Aunt Margaret had moved into the guest bedroom to help with Mom and Dad's recovery. Cousins Jessica and Tommy had become regular visitors, helping with home maintenance and providing emotional support. Uncle David had essentially become a second father to me, offering guidance on legal matters and helping me navigate the complex process of federal criminal prosecution. The private investigator I had hired became a friend and consultant, helping other families identify signs of elder abuse and financial exploitation. His work on Sarah's case had led to reforms in how banks and financial institutions monitor suspicious activity affecting elderly customers. Kevin, my longtime boyfriend, had proposed during the trial proceedings, saying that watching me fight for my family's safety and dignity had convinced him that I was the partner he wanted for life. We were planning a wedding at the house next spring, with the reception in the backyard, where Mom planned to plant a memorial garden for all the elderly victims of Sarah's crimes. The therapy sessions had helped me understand that my 3 years of financial sacrifice to save the house had been motivated by love, not obligation. I had learned to accept gratitude from my parents without feeling guilty about the recognition. I had also learned to set boundaries and recognize warning signs that could prevent future manipulation. Mom had become an advocate for elderly protection, working with local law enforcement to educate seniors about common fraud schemes and family abuse patterns. Dad had found purpose in volunteering with organizations that helped families affected by gambling addiction, sharing his experience of watching addiction destroy someone he loved. Our Thanksgiving dinner that year was held in the same dining room where Sarah's criminal schemes had been exposed 12 months earlier. But the atmosphere was completely different. The table was filled with laughter, genuine gratitude, and the kind of honest communication that our family had never experienced before. During dinner, Dad stood up to make a toast, something he had never done in all my years of family gatherings. "This year, I'm grateful for truth," he said, raising his glass toward me. "I'm grateful for a daughter who was brave enough to expose painful realities in order to protect people she loved. I'm grateful for consequences that prevented worse crimes from being committed. And I'm grateful for the chance to build our family relationships on honesty instead of denial." Mom added her own thoughts. "I'm grateful that love sometimes requires difficult confrontation. I'm grateful that protecting family means more than keeping peace. And I'm grateful that justice, even when it's painful, can lead to healing." The toasts around the table reflected how much we had all learned about courage, integrity, and the difference between enabling destructive behavior and supporting genuine recovery. As I looked around the table at faces that had been shocked and heartbroken exactly 1 year earlier, I saw peace, wisdom, and the kind of deep family bonds that can only be forged through surviving crisis together. Sarah's criminal actions had taught our family invaluable lessons about trust, accountability, and the importance of protecting vulnerable people from exploitation. Her victims had received justice and restitution. Her enablers, including family members who had looked the other way for too long, had learned to recognize and confront destructive patterns. But perhaps most importantly, her crimes had brought out the best in people who chose to fight for justice rather than pretend problems would resolve themselves. The house that Sarah had tried to steal through fraud and manipulation had become a symbol of family resilience, protective love, and the power of truth to triumph over deception. Every room held memories of recovery. Every meal celebrated honest relationships. And every day proved that families can emerge stronger from even the most devastating betrayals. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our family is the courage to expose destructive patterns, even when it's painful. Truth and consequences delivered with love can save everyone involved. And sometimes, losing someone who has chosen criminality over family is the only way to save the people who deserve protection and love. The lesson I learned at Thanksgiving was that protecting the people you love sometimes requires sacrificing the relationships that are hurting them. Justice isn't always comfortable, but it's always necessary. And courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right, despite the fear of consequences. Our family had learned that enabling destructive behavior isn't kindness. It's cruelty to both the person making bad choices and the people they're harming. Real love requires accountability, boundaries, and the willingness to let people experience the natural consequences of their actions. As I finish sharing this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between keeping family peace and protecting people from harm? Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was taking advantage of vulnerable people in your family or community? How did you handle the conflict between loyalty and justice? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences and insights could help other people recognize warning signs or find the courage to speak up when they witness abuse or exploitation. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about family resilience and the power of truth to create healing. Share this story with people who might benefit from understanding the signs of elder abuse or financial exploitation. Thank you for listening to my family's journey through betrayal to healing. I hope our experience helps you understand that justice, even when it's painful, can lead to stronger relationships and better protection for the people we love. May you always have the courage to speak truth, protect the vulnerable, and choose justice over convenience.